and welcome to this meeting of the Administration Committee. Before I start, are there any apologies for absence?
Chair, apologies from Councillor Monica Press.
For who?
Councillor Monica Press.
Oh, right, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, and can I sign the meetings of the minute held on the 12th of July as a true and accurate record? Agreed? Yep, thank you very much. Then we come to the first item on our agenda, which is the interim review of governance. And the background to this, you'll remember that we had a 6-month borough and area governance review to look at, how all our governance arrangements. And then in July 2019, we adopted a package of governance changes. And we said then that we would apply the changes for 2 years and we'd have an interim review in the middle. But then, of course, then COVID came along, and so it was delayed, and the admin committee then agreed it should be done in early 2021. So here we have it. The Centre for Governance and Scrutiny was commissioned to do the review, and it's attached in full in the appendix. The details of the review and the methodology are also in the appendix. And now I'm going to ask you what you think, what your, what hits you with this, and whether we need another review in a few years' time. So, who's first? Mo.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the review is really good. I went through it, and it points out that the worries and the fears we as councillors and our communities had, and the recommendations are very good. Some of them are really good. In particular, in page 2, points 3, 6, 7, and 8. And number 8, I think we need more. But I have a case in my, an example in my ward of St. Helens. Councillor Johnny Talasitis is aware of it. The Latimer Road residents wanted something specifically, and this is the review findings said the council should continue to reflect and act upon the aspirations that local people in the north of the borough have about the role they should play in the design and delivery of services in the area they live. And all residents wanted to be included. Latimer Road residents want to be added to Oxford Garden conservation areas. But it didn't happen because of the height of the proposed building development in there. So this is problematic. And I think we should stick to this and implement this in what we do. If I go through the points, shall I continue or shall I stop?
No, could you just, I think there are two things. One, which is specifically what you're talking about, but of the recommendations, which recommendation was that pertaining to? I couldn't quite find it.
This is numbers, review findings. This is page 2.
So, okay, so it's in the Appendix A.
Okay.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm looking at page 2 at the review finding, but in the recommendations, I don't know exactly which, but I have highlighted it in here.
So on the yellow paper here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was review findings, great, and it was 2, and then which number was it?
Number 6.
Got you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So,
and I think...
so you'd just like to highlight that the council should reflect and act upon the aspirations that local people in the north feel. You think that's important. That's good that we're reflecting that. Thank you.
Yes. And in page 3, it's recommended that to consult in late 2023 before considering whether to commission a further governance review. In my view, this is a good thing to do, to go over this in 2023.
Yes. I suppose the thing that the committee needs to reflect on is, we've had a review a couple of years ago. We've got lots of findings. On the whole, the review's come back and said that we're making good progress. But I think throughout it says the same think actually I was listening to our EDI review, which is that it needs consistency and everything needs to be embedded. And I guess in order to do that, you need time to pass. You need to have time to pass so that you can actually do that and embed all the principles. So I thought it was quite sensible that we should wait and give ourselves a couple of years, and there'll be a new administration by then, and then decide then whether we think that we need it back. So I actually thought that the recommendation, which is 4.3, to consult in late 2023, which gives us time to think about it and see how it all goes and take on board these recommendations, and then to decide whether we want to commission something else. I don't know how the committee feels about that. Yeah? Yeah. Sorry, Johnny and then David.
Okay. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I'd start by welcoming the work that the Centre for Governance Scrutiny have done on this review. As a member of the Borough Area Governance Review and a new backbencher at the time, I can recall very much the impetus there was, the desire for change, and meeting residents from the north and the south of the borough who talked compellingly about the need for us to respond more dynamically to what people are saying. If I just very briefly touch on, Mo, what you said, I'm certainly aware that there are some residents who are concerned about the conservation area extension, but there's also a respect in which it was an example of people from the north of the borough being involved in decision making. Residents asked us to produce a design code and a conservation area extension. We formed a working group that co-designed that document. We did a full consultation on it, and we then reflected on everything that we'd heard. So I think there are lots of real-life examples of us going to the north of the borough and trying to make things better for people over the last couple of years. And just reflecting on that, there are a couple of points in the decision-making and practice document that I found particularly pleasing and that I think we should be encouraged by. The fact that the first line here, by and large, decision-making is consistent, focused and effective, significantly more so than it was a few years ago. And I find that hugely encouraging. I can also think of ways in which a wider pool of decision makers or councillors have influenced decisions across the borough. For example, in my own portfolio, I know that our work on historic built assets has been driven through by a backbench working group and shown the power of a good select committee and the working group system. That was something we really emphasised during that governance review. And then just moving briefly on, and I don't want to take up too much of people's time, but there is a section that talks about the need for more ward-level decision-making as well, which I think is an important point. I think the Chelsea Forum has contributed positively to that. And I'd also highlight the work that we've done on Neighbourhood SIL in the planning portfolio, because that is participatory budget making in its own way. It is an opportunity for ward councillors to set their agenda in the places that they live. And I'm proud that it's something that's come out of all of that work, and that was very much, when I introduced it as a lead member, I was thinking back to some of the work we did in that governance review. Before I just finish my own remarks, I endorse what Elizabeth, what you've said about the need to wait until late 2023 to consult on this. I think these are very uncertain times, particularly with the coronavirus, various lockdowns and measures, and we are all still feeling our way into the post-COVID world. So I think it would be precipitous to make too direct a commitment in relation to the timing of some of this, but that expressing that aspiration is absolutely the right thing to do, because we want to make sure that we keep improving. And I think although there's lots we've done well, there are always things that we can reflect on and do even better.
Yes, gosh, lots of hands. Forest of hands. David.
The comment made in number 9, under relationships and roles, the issue identified in the middle paragraph, these are perceptions about the difficulties of communication shared by minority and opposition groups in other councils, and our BKC. The reasons for such dissatisfaction and distrust are more profound, relating to Grenfell, but predating it. I don't think we should underestimate the degree to actually a number of the comments that are made by the minority and the Lib Dems are generic to all minority parties across London, but I absolutely accept that Grenfell has highlighted and has been a catalyst for making it more complex.
And what did you think about the response?
I think that we need more time, which is why I go along with what you said about having the review in 2 years' time fully to embed and to ensure that we as councillors and officers as officers embed the recommendations made.
I should just be clear, it's not asking for a review in 2 years' time. It's saying in 2 years' time, given the fact that most of this has been positive, we will then reflect on the need to have another review or not. But on the whole, it's pretty good because I think if you want to continue, you always need to look at stuff. But we're not making the decision now to say we're having another review. We're just saying, let's wait, let's see. You know, as Johnny said, there's lots of good stuff. You know, principles being clearly embedded across the organisation, shift in expectations, you know, people feeling that the values and behaviours did overall feel they're having a positive effect. Things are bearing fruit, change in mindset, but it's just this not consistency. So although it points to so many positive things, it's just making sure that we really embed that, and it's not just a sort of will-o'-the-wisp. So I was just right with Kim first, and then Maxwell.
Thank you. Yes, like Johnny, I got a very much welcome this report. I think there were two things that sort of stood out for me. One, which was a positive, because it's something that I quite often hear from residents and say there's not been a change, and I think it's good to record the fact that that it is acknowledged that there has been a change, but that needs to be tempered by, as I say, the first figure that's dumped out is 36% of our officers are not fully familiar with the values and principles, etc. So that's clearly something I think we're obviously going to have to work on. I think the other area really for me, and it comes back to a point that Mo, Councillor Bakti has talked about, is this paragraph little 6 in 2.3, and the two words that jump out of here, it talks about aspirations of local people, and it also talks about the role that they play. And I think in terms, as far as aspirations, absolutely, we should certainly work and with residents to maintain aspirations. The issue, I think, comes for me, which is an area where I think we can maybe consider more work, is on the role, because again, there's a further reference within the report here about, I was just going to quote it if I may, which talks about, where is it? I'll find it in a minute. Sorry, Elizabeth, I had this. Am I sticking 2 pages to go? Shift in expectation, that was the word I was looking for. And I find that quite considerably in terms of our engagement that we're having, is how we define that role, because I think there is sometimes a view and a shift of expectation that consultation means a veto, is that it is the decision finally rests with our residents, and that's not sometimes not the case. And I think there is a discussion here about, again, it talks about how the company could, how we could look at consultation so people could have a better understanding of how that might work in the decision-making process, and that's something which I think are very much welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as it says in the report, change takes time and it needs to be embedded. It can't obviously happen just overnight. I think also, I thought it was interesting, was talking about the Constitution is still not that well known, and it needs to get more embedded in people's minds. And obviously, when you've got a new cohort of councillors next year, they should be re-emerged with it, and obviously anyone re-elected should have the same. I thought it was also interesting points when it's talking about the speed of decision making, because things happen quickly, and obviously it's difficult to scrutinise things on the go. So I thought that awareness was quite important. Also, excuse my ignorance, but why is it called the Kroll Review? Who is Kroll? It mentions that in the report.
A huge review by, I can say Kroll, I can't say commission, but Kroll came in to look at past dealings and how we dealt with people and our property dealings pre 2017. I'll make sure that you get a copy sent to you of the findings. It's pretty seminal work, actually. Okay. Robert, do you want to comment at all?
I didn't actually have anything particular to say,
Okay.
to be honest. It's all in the report.
So I think we've... and then I'm going to ask Gordon to come in after that.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to mention all the points I have highlighted, but overall I said the recommendation are what we've been talking about in the past, me and my colleagues been talking about, so we are familiar. Nothing generic about this. We knew that, we've been complaining, talking about it, and in my view, the most important thing is, in page 11, the recommendation, the center recommendation, use senior officer leadership team decision planning meetings to take a longer term view on policy development. Because we felt before that policies were, sometimes we felt that we were rushed into new policies. We need to give it more time to develop. We need to allow our residents to speak, those observers or whoever groups in the committee to contribute and say their views. So this is what we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon, I'd really be interested in your reflections on this.
Well, thank you very much for the invite to speak tonight, and I very much would like to suggest more information about how the council works. The residents that I work with in housing are very unfamiliar with that. So some of you may be aware that the Housing Management and a group of residents of the TCC, that's the Tenants Consultative Committee, have been carrying out some next steps workshops. What has emerged around scrutiny is that scrutiny is insufficient at just TCC level. I am talking about housing management here rather than the entire borough. Secondly, B, and this is most important, that the Housing and Community Select Committee had failed to facilitate resident scrutiny around housing and housing management, even though there are several commitments to involve residents in the scrutiny process. For example, RBKC's Charter for Public Participation adopted in 2019 and a part of the decision-making process here tonight. 3.1 in that paper, in terms of public participation, the council's values and behaviours mean that accepting the principle that those impacted upon by major proposals or actions should be given an opportunity to be involved in advance. Also, RBKC's resident involvement strategy from housing, also mentioned in tonight's paper, 6.1, you, the residents, influence the decisions that affect you. Decisions which affect your homes and neighbourhoods will affect the well-being and lives of residents. And it is critical that as residents, you have the ability to shape and influence these decisions. The Charter for Social Housing Residents, the Social Housing White Paper, January 2021, Resident Empowerment, Section 92, to support residents to engage effectively. The paper goes on to say, we will work with 10 led national bodies to set out a plan for how we can best support residents to take part in the scrutiny activities which are so important in holding their landlords to account. It is with this in mind that I would lay out 2 requests that could be implemented as quickly as a part of the short-term proposed actions by CFGS as a part of the Council's next steps for decision tonight as we move forward to fulfill the aforementioned Charter agreements. 1. Select members of the TCC will be notified of any key decisions that will affect our homes and therefore our well-being. And 2, that the selected members of the TCC will be able to select and bring to Housing and Community Select Committee for scrutiny key decisions that we feel will affect our well-being. I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Robert, because I think the specifics that you're asking for really are about the scrutiny, and obviously you feel that the scrutiny of the housing is not quite working in the way that you would like it. So I think that is something that we need to take away, because I don't think that the scrutiny things are here, are they? The proposed changes or whatever, but I do think you have a valid point that we need to take up if you feel that actually things that the TCC should be recommending scrutiny is just not being looked at. That is something which we need to do. Sorry, we need to look at.
I mean, yes, Gordon, on your first request, I mean, we can notify anyone who wants to be notified on key decisions. That mechanism exists, so it's as simple as letting us have names, and that bit of it I can do more easily. Scrutiny, of course, control their own agenda and ways of working. So if you're talking about the Housing and Communities Scrutiny Committee, then at the moment Councillor Ali is the chair of that, and I'd certainly raise your points with him, because the way that committee works is largely down to his style of chairmanship.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you. So what I would say about that is that, that we are missing scrutiny at that select committee, and that is why we would ask for that. So we as residents will continue to campaign for that moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, can we make sure that that's noted in the minutes? And then could we please let the scrutiny chair know? And could we please ask the scrutiny chair to do something about it? That'd be very helpful. Okay, thank you very much, Gordon. Okay, so let's go back to the main recommendations in the report, which are in paragraph 4. So we're asked to note and comment on, which we've done, the report, and note the accompanying action plan. And you'll have noticed that our response has been in the far right column. And what I'd like you to decide upon or agree to is that this report is submitted to the full council on the 20th of October for information, so they can see that the Centre for Public Scrutiny has done a thorough job, that they've made some proposals, and that we've responded in a proper way. To instruct officers, I think this is really important, to continue to implement the action plan and then come back to us in March just to update us. So it's a continual thing of continuing to update, here's the action plan, what are we doing about it, is it being embedded, is there consistency, etc. And thirdly, to consult in late 2023 and figure out whether we wish then to commission a further governance review or we don't. So are you all happy with those recommendations? Yes? Agreed. Thank you very much. Could we then turn to the next paper, which is A5, which recommends revisions to the Constitution and the adoptions. And the first revision would be the Investment Committee, a proposed increase in the number of non-voting co-opted members, which I don't have a problem with. I don't know if anyone else. I think it seems perfectly sensible. David, do you have anything to say on this? Because aren't you on that committee? Are you on the investment committee?
I'm actually not on that committee,
you're on the
but
audit,
I think it's a valuable recommendation, and I would agree with it.
Maxwell.
All I say is it's a temporary change. It's basically for an overlap. But temporarily, I think there'll be slightly more non-voting members than members, but there is a gap anyway in terms of one vacancy. So it seems quite sensible.
Thank you. Okay. So we agree that recommendation. And then if we turn over the page, the next thing is about the Constitution, that the Council, that we recommend to the Council that it amends the Constitution by including Part 4, the executive, which is set out in paragraph 1. So this is about making sure that our Constitution is always up to date and is always sort of proper and right. And you will remember that during Module 3 of the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry, there were lots of questions about the role of the executive and the role of scrutiny. And we need to obviously consider and implement any recommendations made by the public inquiry following the phase 2 hearings. And we need to listen to what their recommendations are about council governance and the constitution. But this version, the version that they were looking at was a prior version of the constitution, and this is really tweaking it to ensure that everyone knows what the responsibilities are of the leadership team, what the responsibilities are of the statutory guidance on the roles and responsibilities of the Director of Children's Services and Lead Member for Children's Services, and what the responsibilities that officers have, so that we're all clear what our roles are, what we're accountable for, what our responsibilities are. That's how I read it. Barry, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. If I could just add to that and say the phrasing in the Constitution was more than infelicitous, in as much as you could read it in many different ways. This is very common, I have to say, in constitutions in local government, because the statutory regulations about the role and responsibilities of officers and members is actually very weak. And indeed, the only reference to there being in statutory regulation for explaining the role difference between members and officers lies in relation to the Director of Children's Services and the lead member. There's no other source for this. And of course, what we've done is go through all of the responsibilities of the executive, being really clear where advice stems from and where decisions are made, and the different roles of the executive management team and best professional advice, including legal advice and financial advice, and the decision making. And that's actually clearly set out in the latter part of this from essentially from 128 onwards. And that was needed because of the lack of clarity in the Constitution as is, which was identified in questioning and in evidence in the Grenfell public inquiry. So I think this is the best position that we have at the moment in relation to this. And because most of the questioning, and indeed this was something that was identified in the Kroll report that was referred to earlier, most external commentators and observers on local government talk about decision making. They look for flaws in the decision. Mostly they're looking at advice giving and flaws in the advice. And I think we're trying to make that clear here by saying the responsibility of the executive directors is to give advice, but it's also, unlike in the civil service, local government officers have what's known as constitutional personality. They exist in the Constitution. They're not, they don't give advice under the cloak of privilege, for example, and therefore that issue had to be explained here in respect of what the responsibilities of chief officers are, and that it's their responsibilities, not those of the executive members, and that's really in paragraph 210. If you may recall that the former councillor was asked questions about his responsibilities in relation to staffing, and he answered properly that actually in relation to staffing this was an officer matter, not a member matter.
It clearly lays out what responsibilities everyone has and what they can be held accountable for, where the decision-making powers lie, etc., so that we all know what we should be doing, and Barry and his officers know very clearly what they should be doing, and where the line is between the two, so that we can make proper decisions. So, Maxwell.
obviously you said the Constitution's living and breathing, so if you create a new role in the leadership team, or you take one away, or whatever, obviously the Constitution will have to adjust with that, with the said responses. Okay, good.
Any other questions, any other comments? I think we should all be very pleased when this has been adopted because it helps us.
I would like to say it's very plain English, it's very clear, it sets out the roles and everyone, so I'm very pleased with it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me turn back. In which case, if you look at paragraph 3, what we're asked to do is to propose that the Council re-adopt the Constitution at its meeting on the 20th of October. Yeah? Agreed? Thank you very much. I think that is it, unless I've forgotten anything. I believe that's the end of the meeting. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Gordon, thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to come in person. And the meeting is now closed. Thank you.